Marcus Brennan watched the woman behind the serving counter with barely concealed amusement. "Look at her, try to act all military," he muttered to his companion. "But she's never seen real action in her life." The other recruits at his table snickered, their voices carrying across the nearly empty mess hall with the confidence of men who believe themselves untouchable. Commander Elena Vasquez kept her expression neutral as she ladled portions onto plates, her movements precise and economical. The starched Navy uniform she wore bore no distinctive insignia beyond basic service ribbons. Nothing that would hint at the classified operations that had earned her a reputation in circles these recruits would never access. The fluorescent lights overhead cast harsh shadows across the institutional green walls, and the smell of industrial-grade coffee mixed with the lingering aroma of the evening meal. Before we dive into this story, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you've witnessed similar situations where military personnel were underestimated based on their current assignment. Brennan stood from his table, his 6-foot frame moving with the swagger of someone accustomed to being the biggest person in the room. Back in college, he had dominated both the football field and the social hierarchy, and military training seemed like it would be just another arena for him to establish his superiority. His 4 companions followed his lead, their chairs scraping against the linoleum floor as they approached the serving line. "You know what your problem is?" Brennan addressed Elena directly, his voice loud enough for the scattered personnel in the mess hall to hear. "You think wearing that uniform makes you one of us." His friends positioned themselves strategically, creating a semicircle that blocked her escape routes while maintaining the appearance of a casual conversation. Elena continued serving, her dark eyes tracking each recruit's position without appearing to pay them any attention. 23 years of military service had taught her to assess threats long before they materialized into action. These boys, because that's what they were despite their posturing, had no idea they were standing within striking distance of someone who had eliminated enemy combatants in 7 different countries. The mess hall stretched out behind them, its long rows of empty tables bearing witness to this developing confrontation. Evening chow had ended 30 minutes ago, leaving only the cleanup crew and a handful of late arrivals. The skeleton staff in the kitchen had their backs turned, focused on their closing duties and unaware of the tension building at the serving line. Private Collins, one of Brennan's followers, leaned against the counter with deliberate casualness. "We were just wondering," he said, his tone dripping with false politeness, "how someone like you ended up in a place like this. Seems like maybe desk duty would be more your speed." The other recruits laughed, their confidence growing with each passing moment that Elena failed to respond to their provocation. Elena's hands remained steady as she reached for another serving spoon, her fingers wrapping around the metal handle with the same controlled grip she had once used on much deadlier instruments. The recruits interpreted her silence as weakness, their postures becoming more aggressive as they sensed what they believed was an easy target. Brennan stepped closer, close enough that Elena could smell the arrogance on him, like cheap aftershave. "I bet you've never even held a real weapon," he continued, his voice dropping to what he probably thought was an intimidating whisper. "Probably just push papers around all day, pretending to be a real soldier." His companions nodded their agreement, feeding off their leader's bravado like scavengers around a kill. The institutional clock on the far wall ticked toward 1900 hours, its mechanical rhythm the only sound competing with the recruits' increasingly bold commentary. Elena finished portioning the last of the evening's meal, her movements unhurried despite the growing hostility surrounding her. These young men had no conception of what real intimidation looked like, no understanding of the difference between playground bullying and actual threat assessment. She set down the serving spoon and turned to face them fully for the first time, her expression still professionally neutral. The recruits took this as encouragement, their grins widening as they prepared to escalate their harassment. They had no way of knowing that Elena's apparent compliance was simply the calm that preceded a storm they could never have imagined. Private Rodriguez joined the group, his combat boots clicking against the polished floor as he approached from the kitchen entrance. "What's going on here?" he asked, though his smirk suggested he already understood the entertainment value of the situation. Brennan jerked his thumb toward Elena. Just having a friendly conversation with our cook here about military service. Elena began methodically cleaning the serving area, her movements deliberate and controlled. Each action served a dual purpose, maintaining her cover while positioning kitchen implements within easy reach should the situation deteriorate further. The stainless steel surfaces reflected the harsh overhead lighting, creating a sterile atmosphere that seemed to amplify every word and gesture. "This is Rich," Collins said, his voice carrying across the mess hall. Someone who probably joined the Navy to see the world and ended up ladling mashed potatoes for real warriors. His companions erupted in laughter, their voices echoing off the institutional walls with the cruelty that only comes from pack mentality. Brennan leaned against the serving counter, his bulky frame casting a shadow across Elena's workspace. "Tell us, sweetheart," he said, the endearment dripping with condescension. "What's the most dangerous thing you've ever done in that uniform? File some paperwork really fast?" The recruits found this particularly amusing, their laughter growing louder and more aggressive. Elena continued her cleaning routine, her expression unchanged despite the escalating harassment. 20 feet away, Sergeant Morrison emerged from the kitchen carrying a stack of empty trays, but he kept his attention focused on his task, either unaware of the confrontation or choosing to ignore it. The unspoken military hierarchy meant that enlisted personnel rarely intervened in situations involving other enlisted ranks without clear justification. Private Kowalski, the youngest of the group, felt emboldened by his companion's behavior. He stepped closer to Elena, invading her personal space with the confidence of someone who had never faced real consequences. "You know what I think?" he announced. "I think they put you here because you couldn't hack it anywhere else. This is like military charity work." The serving line stretched 10 feet in either direction, its metal rails and sneeze guards creating a barrier between Elena and the recruits that was more psychological than physical. The recruits had positioned themselves to block both ends, though they maintained enough distance to preserve the appearance of a casual encounter rather than outright intimidation. Elena's hands moved with practiced efficiency as she secured the food warmers and began breaking down the serving station. Each action followed standard protocol, but her movements possessed a fluidity and precision that spoke of training far beyond basic military service. The recruits, however, interpreted her methodical behavior as nervous compliance with their dominance. Brennan pushed away from the counter, his posture becoming more aggressive. "I'm talking to you," he said, his voice rising slightly. "When a fellow service member asks you a question, military courtesy requires an answer. Don't they teach basic respect in whatever Mickey Mouse division you came from?" His friends nodded their agreement, their confidence growing with each moment. Elena remained silent. Rodriguez moved to flank Elena's position, his movement casual but clearly coordinated with Brennan's approach. "We're not trying to be difficult," he said with false reasonableness. "We're just curious about your background. Maybe you could enlighten us about your extensive combat experience." The sarcasm in his voice was thick enough to cut with the industrial knives hanging nearby. Elena finished securing the last of the food containers, her actions betraying no urgency despite the increasing hostility surrounding her. The mess hall's ventilation system hummed overhead, circulating air that carried the lingering sense of industrial cooking and the sharper smell of cleaning chemicals. The mundane nature of the environment stood in stark contrast to the tension building at the serving line. Collins stepped closer, emboldened by Elena's continued silence. "Maybe she's deaf," he suggested to his companions. "That would explain why she's stuck in food service instead of doing real Navy work." The group found this theory hilarious, their laughter becoming more mocking and deliberately cruel. Private Torres, who had been quiet until now, decided to join the harassment. "Look at those hands," he observed loudly. "Soft as a baby's. Definitely never handled anything more dangerous than a can opener." He reached out, as if to examine Elena's hands more closely, his movement crossing the line from verbal harassment into potential physical contact. Elena's eyes tracked Torres's approaching hand without shifting her head position, her peripheral vision cataloging the positions of all 5 recruits with the automatic precision of someone trained in close-quarters combat assessment. The kitchen knives were 18 inches to her left, the industrial coffee pot 14 inches to her right, and the serving spoons within immediate grasp could be weaponized in under 2 seconds if necessary. Brennan sensed what he interpreted as weakness and pressed his advantage. "You know what your problem is?" he continued, his voice taking on the tone of someone delivering wisdom to an inferior. "You think you can just coast through your service without earning the respect of real military personnel. That's not how this works." The mess hall's overhead speakers crackled to life with the evening announcement. "All personnel, evening chow is now secured. Cleanup crews report to stations." The mechanical voice echoed through the nearly empty space, providing a temporary distraction that the recruits quickly ignored as they refocused their attention on Elena. Brennan stepped back slightly, surveying the scene with the satisfaction of a predator confident in his dominance. "You hear that?" he said to Elena, his voice carrying mock concern. "Cleanup time. Hope you can handle that kind of responsibility without adult supervision." His companions snickered, their amusement growing more cruel with each passing moment. Elena methodically removed her serving gloves, folding them with the precise movements of someone who had performed similar tasks thousands of times under far more challenging circumstances. The latex made a soft, snapping sound as she disposed of it in the designated receptacle, a mundane action that somehow carried an undertone of finality the recruits failed to recognize. Private Torres moved closer to the serving counter, his confidence emboldened by what he perceived as Elena's submission. "My grandmother could probably handle combat better than you," he announced loudly. "At least she fought back when neighborhood kids got too rowdy." The comparison drew approving laughter from his companions, who seemed to view cruelty as a competitive sport. Rodriguez positioned himself near the kitchen entrance, effectively cutting off one of Elena's potential escape routes while maintaining the pretense of casual conversation. "We're just trying to understand," he said with false sincerity, "how someone ends up in your position. Did you request food service? Or did they just figure it was the safest place to put you?" Elena began wiping down the serving counter with smooth, methodical strokes, her attention apparently focused on removing every trace of the evening meal. Her movements possessed an economy of motion that spoke of extensive training, though the recruits interpreted her diligence as nervous energy or desperate compliance with their intimidation. Collins leaned against the sneeze guard, his posture deliberately invasive. "I bet you've never even been through basic combat training," he observed. "Probably went straight from civilian life to playing dress-up in that uniform." The accusation hung in the air like a challenge, though Elena continued her cleaning routine without acknowledging the provocation. The institutional lighting cast harsh shadows across the mess hall, highlighting the contrast between Elena's composed professionalism and the recruits' increasingly aggressive posturing. Scattered tables and chairs bore witness to the confrontation, their empty surfaces reflecting the fluorescent glare like silent observers to the developing situation. Brennan moved to Elena's other side, creating a more complete encirclement while maintaining enough distance to preserve plausible deniability. "You know what I think happened?" he announced to his companions. "I think she tried real military training, couldn't hack it, and got reassigned to permanent kitchen duty. It's like military welfare." Private Kowalski, encouraged by his leader's boldness, stepped closer to the serving line. "Maybe we should test her military knowledge," he suggested with mock enthusiasm. "Ask her some basic questions about combat tactics or weapon systems. See if she knows anything beyond food preparation." His suggestion drew approving murmurs from the other recruits. Elena finished cleaning the counter surface and moved to secure the remaining equipment, her actions following established protocol, despite the increasing harassment. Each movement was calculated and purposeful, though she maintained the appearance of someone simply completing routine duties under pressure. Torres reached across the serving line as if to examine Elena's uniform more closely. "Look at those ribbons," he said dismissively. Probably participation awards for showing up on time. I bet she's never been anywhere more dangerous than a supply depot in peacetime. His companions nodded their agreement, feeding off each other's contempt. The mess hall's air circulation system continued its mechanical humming, moving stale air through vents that had witnessed countless similar confrontations over the years. The institutional environment seemed designed to amplify tension, its sterile surfaces and harsh lighting creating an atmosphere where cruelty could flourish under the guise of military tradition. Rodriguez checked his watch with theatrical precision. "You know what?" he announced. "I think we should help our friend here understand what real military service looks like. Maybe give her some unofficial training in respect and proper protocol." The suggestion carried an ominous undertone that made the other recruits grin with anticipation. Elena's peripheral vision tracked each recruit's position while she continued her assigned tasks, her situational awareness operating at levels far beyond anything these young men could comprehend. The kitchen implements within reach, the distances to exits, the potential weapons available, the timing required for various responses all registered in her consciousness like data points in a tactical assessment. Brennan straightened to his full height, using his physical size as an intimidation tactic. "Here's what's going to happen," he said, his voice taking on the authoritative tone of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "You're going to answer our questions about your military experience, and you're going to do it with the respect that real service members deserve. No more hiding behind that cleaning rag." The kitchen staff behind Elena completed their final cleanup tasks, their voices fading as they moved toward the rear exit. The sound of their departure echoed through the service area, leaving Elena increasingly isolated with the 5 recruits who had positioned themselves around the serving line like wolves circling prey. Private Collins moved closer to the counter, his movements deliberate and calculated. "You know what I think?" he said, addressing his companions while keeping his eyes fixed on Elena. "I think she's been getting special treatment because nobody wants to hurt her feelings. Probably never faced a real challenge in her entire military career." Elena folded the cleaning cloth with precise movements, her actions maintaining the rhythm of routine duty while her mind cataloged the tactical situation developing around her. The recruits had unconsciously adopted a formation that would be effective against a civilian, but left multiple vulnerabilities that trained personnel would recognize instantly. Brennan stepped forward, his bulk casting a longer shadow across Elena's workspace. "We're going to make this simple," he announced, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who believed himself untouchable. "You're going to tell us about your most challenging military experience. And it better be more exciting than learning to operate a can opener." Private Torres laughed at his leader's humor, the sound harsh and mocking in the nearly empty mess hall. "Maybe she could tell us about the time she had to serve food to officers," he suggested. "That probably required months of specialized training." The other recruits found this observation hilarious, their laughter echoing off the institutional walls. Elena moved to secure the industrial coffee dispensers, her actions following standard closing procedures despite the increasing hostility surrounding her. Each movement was economical and purposeful, though the recruits interpreted her methodical behavior as evidence of nervous compliance with their intimidation tactics. Rodriguez positioned himself directly in front of the serving line, blocking Elena's most direct path away from the counter. "Here's what's really bothering me," he said with false reasonableness. "We're all supposed to be military personnel, but some of us are clearly carrying more weight than others. That doesn't seem fair to the people doing real work." The overhead lighting flickered momentarily, casting brief shadows that danced across the mess hall before returning to their harsh, steady illumination. The institutional environment seemed to amplify every sound and gesture, creating an atmosphere where confrontation felt inevitable and escape routes appeared increasingly limited. Kowalski moved to Elena's left side, completing the encirclement while maintaining enough distance to preserve the appearance of casual conversation. "You want to know what I think happened?" he asked his companions. "I think she knows someone with influence, got special assignments her whole career, never had to prove herself like the rest of us. Elena finished securing the coffee station and began organizing the remaining serving utensils, her movements precise and controlled despite the growing aggression surrounding her. The recruits had no way of knowing that their positioning and behavior had triggered automatic threat assessment protocols developed through years of specialized training. Brennan's voice took on a more menacing tone as he pressed his perceived advantage. "We're not asking for much," he said, stepping closer to the serving counter. "Just some honesty about your background and qualifications. Military personnel are supposed to be able to defend their service record when questioned by fellow service members." Torres reached across the serving line as if to examine Elena's uniform insignia more closely, his movement crossing the boundary between verbal harassment and physical intimidation. "These ribbons are interesting," he observed loudly. "Basic service awards, nothing that indicates actual combat experience or specialized training." Exactly what we expected. The mess hall's ventilation system continued its mechanical operation, circulating air that carried the lingering sense of institutional cooking and industrial cleaning supplies. The mundane environment provided a stark contrast to the tension building at the serving line, where 5 recruits believed they were asserting military hierarchy over someone they considered inferior. Collins stepped closer, his confidence growing with each moment Elena failed to respond to their escalating provocation. "Maybe she doesn't understand military protocol," he suggested to his companions. "Maybe we need to provide some informal instruction about proper respect for fellow service members." The suggestion carried implications that made the other recruits grin with anticipation. Elena's peripheral vision tracked each recruit's position while she completed her assigned closing duties, her situational awareness operating at levels that would have impressed her former instructors. The distances, angles, available implements, and potential responses all registered in her consciousness like variables in a tactical equation. Rodriguez checked the time on his watch with theatrical precision. "You know what?" he announced. "I think our friend here needs to understand that military service requires more than just showing up and following basic instructions. Maybe it's time for some practical demonstration of what real military training looks like." Private Kowalski nodded his agreement, his expression eager with the prospect of escalation. "We could start with some basic physical fitness requirements," he suggested. "See if she can handle the kind of challenges that real military personnel face every day." The proposal drew approving murmurs from his companions. The last of the kitchen staff disappeared through the rear exit, their voices fading into the corridor beyond as the heavy door swung shut with a metallic clang. The sound echoed through the mess hall like a final warning, leaving Elena truly alone with the 5 recruits who had been steadily tightening their circle around the serving line. Brennan's background had prepared him for this moment in ways he couldn't fully articulate. 3 years of college football had taught him that intimidation was often more effective than actual violence, that the threat of physical confrontation could break opponents before contact was ever made. His teammates had followed his lead because he projected confidence and delivered results, traits that translated seamlessly to military training. The quarterback mentality served him well in basic training, where drill sergeants valued natural leadership and the ability to motivate struggling recruits. Brennan discovered that his combination of physical presence and tactical thinking made him a standout candidate, someone destined for advancement and special assignments. The recognition fed his ego and reinforced his belief that some people were simply born to lead while others were meant to follow. Private Collins had joined the military to escape a deadened hometown where opportunities were limited and futures were predetermined by family circumstances. The structure and hierarchy of military service provided him with a sense of purpose and belonging he had never experienced in civilian life. Following someone like Brennan felt natural, comfortable, and professionally advantageous. Rodriguez brought a different perspective to the group, having grown up in a rough neighborhood where respect was earned through demonstration rather than assumption. He understood that military service could provide the stability and advancement opportunities his family had never enjoyed, But he also recognized that success required allies and strategic positioning within the social hierarchy. Torres and Kowalski represented the eager followers every leader needed, young men who lacked the confidence to challenge authority but possessed enough ambition to align themselves with those who did. Their backgrounds differed in specifics, but shared common themes of seeking validation and belonging through military service. Elena's silence and apparent compliance with their harassment reinforced their shared assumption that she represented everything wrong with modern military integration policies. To them, she embodied the lowering of standards, the accommodation of weakness, and the dilution of warrior culture that they believed threatened military effectiveness. "This isn't personal," Rodriguez said, his tone suggesting reasonableness despite the obvious hostility of their positioning. "We just think you should understand how real military personnel are expected to conduct themselves. Maybe nobody ever explained proper protocol to you before now." Elena finished organizing the serving utensils, her movements maintaining their methodical precision despite the increasing aggression surrounding her. The stainless steel implements reflected the harsh overhead lighting, creating brief flashes of illumination that seemed to punctuate the growing tension in the air. Brennan stepped closer to the serving counter, using his height advantage to loom over Elena's position. "Here's what's going to happen," he announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to having his orders followed without question. "You're going to demonstrate some basic military knowledge, starting with proper respect for superior personnel." The mess hall stretched around them like an arena, its empty tables and chairs bearing silent witness to the confrontation developing at the serving line. The institutional lighting cast everything in harsh detail, eliminating shadows and creating an atmosphere where every gesture and expression was starkly visible. Collins moved to block Elena's access to the kitchen entrance, his positioning casual but clearly intentional. "We're not unreasonable people," he said with false sincerity. "All we're asking for is some demonstration that you deserve to wear that uniform. Simple military courtesy and basic respect for fellow service members." Elena's hands remained steady as she completed her closing duties, though her peripheral vision continuously tracked each recruit's position and movement. The tactical situation was developing exactly as she had anticipated from the moment Brennan first approached the serving line with his companions in tow. Torres stepped closer, emboldened by what he interpreted as Elena's submission to their authority. "Maybe we should start with something basic," he suggested to his companions. "See if she knows how to properly address military personnel of superior rank and experience." The proposal drew approving nods from the other recruits. The overhead speakers remained silent, having delivered their final announcement of the evening. The mechanical sounds of the building's infrastructure provided the only background noise, creating an atmosphere where every word and gesture carried additional weight and significance. Private Kowalski's eagerness was evident in his posture and expression as he anticipated the escalation his companions seemed to be building toward. "This could be educational for everyone," he observed, addressing the group while keeping his attention focused on Elena. Real military training in action. Elena secured the last of the serving equipment, her actions following established protocol despite the hostile environment that had developed around her position. Each movement was calculated and purposeful, though the recruits continued to interpret her methodical behavior as evidence of nervous compliance with their intimidation tactics. Rodriguez stepped forward, his movement calculated to demonstrate leadership within the group dynamic. "You know what your real problem is?" he said, addressing Elena directly. "You think you can just hide behind that uniform without earning the respect it represents. That's not how military service works for people who actually deserve to be here." Elena removed her hairnet with the same methodical precision she applied to every task, folding the mesh material and disposing of it according to standard sanitation protocol. The simple action somehow carried an undertone of finality that the recruits failed to recognize, too focused on their own sense of dominance to perceive the subtle shift in her demeanor. The mess hall's industrial clock marked the passage of time with mechanical precision, its steady ticking providing a rhythmic counterpoint to the escalating tension at the serving line. 23 minutes had elapsed since the recruits first approached Elena's position, and their confidence had grown with each moment she failed to challenge their increasingly aggressive behavior. Brennan positioned himself directly in front of the serving counter, using his bulk to create a physical barrier between Elena and the main exit. "We've been patient with you," he announced, his tone suggesting magnanimous restraint despite the obvious hostility of his positioning. But patience has limits, especially when it comes to military discipline and proper respect. Torres moved closer to Elena's left side, his proximity crossing the boundary between conversation and intimidation. "Maybe she doesn't understand basic military hierarchy," he suggested to his companions. Maybe nobody ever explained how real service members are supposed to interact with each other in professional environments. Elena began removing her apron, her movements deliberate and unhurried despite the aggressive positioning of the 5 recruits surrounding her station. The white fabric had protected her uniform during food service, but removing it revealed the full scope of ribbons and insignia that adorned her chest, details the recruits had previously dismissed as meaningless participation awards. Collins stepped closer, his confidence emboldened by what he perceived as Elena's continued submission to their authority. "Here's what we're going to do," he announced, his voice carrying the tone of someone delivering an ultimatum. "You're going to demonstrate proper military courtesy, starting with acknowledging the superior experience and qualifications of the personnel addressing you." The overhead ventilation system continued its mechanical operation, circulating air that carried the lingering sense of industrial cooking and cleaning chemicals. The institutional environment seemed designed to amplify confrontation, its sterile surfaces and harsh lighting creating an atmosphere where aggression felt justified and escape appeared increasingly impossible. Private Kowalski moved to complete the encirclement, his positioning ensuring that Elena had no clear path away from the serving line without directly confronting one of the recruits. "This is really simple," he said, addressing Elena with false reasonableness. "Just basic respect and acknowledgement of proper military hierarchy. Nothing complicated or unreasonable." Elena folded her apron with precise movements, placing it in the designated storage area according to established protocol. Her actions maintained the appearance of routine duty completion, though her situational awareness operated at levels far beyond anything the recruits could comprehend or appreciate. Rodriguez checked his watch again, the gesture theatrical and clearly intended to demonstrate his control over the developing situation. "Time's running short," he observed, his voice carrying an ominous undertone. "Kitchen duty has specific schedules, and we wouldn't want you to fall behind on your assigned responsibilities because of this conversation." The empty mess hall stretched around them like a coliseum, its institutional furniture and sterile surfaces bearing witness to the confrontation that had been building steadily for the past half hour. The recruits had unconsciously adopted positions that would contain a civilian, but left multiple tactical vulnerabilities that trained personnel would recognize instantly. Brennan's voice took on a more menacing quality as he sensed what he believed was the approaching conclusion of their intimidation campaign. "We're being reasonable here," he said, stepping closer to the serving counter. "All we're asking for is some demonstration that you understand military protocol and proper respect for fellow service members with superior qualifications." Torres reached across the serving line as if to examine Elena's uniform ribbons more closely, his movement representing the first direct attempt at physical contact during the confrontation. "These decorations are interesting," he observed loudly, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Basic service awards, nothing that indicates actual combat experience or specialized training capabilities." Elena's peripheral vision tracked Torres's approaching hand, while simultaneously monitoring the positions and postures of the other 4 recruits. The tactical assessment that had been running continuously in the background of her consciousness suddenly shifted into active mode, calculating distances, angles, and response options with the automatic precision of extensive training. Collins stepped forward, his eagerness evident as he anticipated the escalation his companions seemed to be building toward. Maybe it's time for some practical demonstration of what real military training looks like, he suggested, his voice carrying implications that made the other recruits grin with anticipation of the entertainment they expected to follow. Torres's hand reached toward Elena's uniform ribbons, his fingers extended to touch what he dismissed as meaningless decorations. The movement represented a clear escalation from verbal harassment to physical intimidation, crossing a line that would trigger responses the recruits could never have anticipated or understood. Elena's voice cut through the tension for the first time since the confrontation began, her tone carrying a quiet authority that seemed to emerge from nowhere. "I would advise against that course of action, Private." The words were spoken softly, but they carried an undertone of command that made Torres hesitate mid-reach, his hand freezing inches from her uniform. Brennan's confidence wavered momentarily at the unexpected response, but he quickly recovered his aggressive posture. "Now she decides to talk," he said with forced bravado, though something in Elena's tone had introduced an element of uncertainty into the dynamic. "Too little, too late for military courtesy, sweetheart." The mess hall's atmosphere seemed to shift subtly, as if Elena's words had altered the fundamental nature of the confrontation. The recruits felt the change without understanding its source, their formation remaining intact, but their confidence no longer as absolute as it had been moments before. Rodriguez stepped closer, trying to regain the momentum they had been building. "You think using a few military terms makes you one of us?" he challenged, his voice slightly louder than before, as if volume could restore the authority they had been asserting. "We're still waiting for some real demonstration of military knowledge and proper respect." Elena's posture remained relaxed, but something fundamental had changed in her bearing. The submissive kitchen worker they had been harassing seemed to have been replaced by someone entirely different, though the transformation was so subtle the recruits couldn't identify exactly what had shifted. Collins moved to support his companions, sensing that their intimidation campaign had reached a critical juncture. "Here's what's going to happen," he announced, his voice carrying forced authority. "You're going to show proper respect for military personnel with superior qualifications and experience, starting right now." The overhead lighting seemed harsher somehow, casting sharper shadows and creating an atmosphere where every gesture and expression carried heightened significance. Elena stood behind the serving counter like a calm center in the storm of aggression that surrounded her, her demeanor suggesting reserves of capability the recruits had never encountered. Private Kowalski felt compelled to reassert the group's dominance, stepping closer to Elena's position. "We're not asking for much," he said, though his voice lacked the confidence it had carried minutes earlier. "Just basic military courtesy and acknowledgement of proper hierarchy." Elena's dark eyes moved deliberately from recruit to recruit, making direct eye contact with each one in turn. The assessment was clinical and thorough, as if she were cataloging their capabilities and finding them significantly lacking. The attention should have been intimidating, but instead it made the recruits feel exposed and vulnerable. Torres completed his reaching motion despite Elena's warning, his fingers making contact with the ribbon rack on her uniform. The fabric felt standard issue beneath his touch, but the moment of contact seemed to trigger something in Elena's demeanor that transformed the entire dynamic of the confrontation. Brennan sensed that their carefully constructed intimidation scenario was beginning to slip away from their control, though he couldn't identify the specific cause of his growing unease. "Maybe you didn't hear us clearly," he said, his voice rising as he tried to reassert dominance through volume and aggression. The institutional clock on the far wall continued its mechanical marking of time, each tick seeming to count down towards something the recruits couldn't identify, but increasingly sensed approaching. The mundane environment of the mess hall had become charged with potential energy that none of them understood. Rodriguez moved closer to the serving counter, his positioning intended to demonstrate continued control over the situation. "We've been patient with you," he announced, though his tone suggested that patience was rapidly approaching its limits. "But there are consequences for disrespecting fellow military personnel." Elena's response came with the same quiet authority that had marked her first words. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying a quality of command that seemed to emerge from years of experience the recruits had never imagined. "You have approximately 15 seconds to reconsider your current course of action." The warning hung in the air like a challenge, though the recruits interpreted it as desperate bluffing from someone finally beginning to crack under their sustained pressure. Collins laughed, the sound harsh and mocking in the sterile environment of the mess hall. Private Kowalski stepped forward, emboldened by what he perceived as Elena's desperation. 15 seconds for what?" he challenged, his voice carrying the swagger of someone who believed himself to be in complete control of the situation. Elena's posture shifted almost imperceptibly, her weight redistributing in ways that would have been recognized instantly by anyone with specialized training. The recruits noticed nothing, too focused on their own perceived dominance to recognize the subtle indicators of someone preparing for action. The 15 seconds Elena had mentioned began counting down in her mind with the automatic precision of someone who had learned to measure time in life-or-death increments. The recruits remained oblivious to the significance of her warning, interpreting it as desperate posturing from someone finally beginning to crack under their sustained harassment. Brennan's laughter echoed through the mess hall, harsh and confident. 15 seconds? He repeated mockingly. "What exactly do you think is going to happen in 15 seconds? Are you going to call for help from your kitchen supervisor?" The suggestion drew appreciative chuckles from his companions, who viewed Elena's warning as confirmation of their complete dominance. Torres maintained his grip on Elena's uniform ribbon, his fingers touching the fabric with deliberate disrespect. "These little decorations don't mean anything," he announced loudly. "Participation awards for showing up and following basic instructions. Nothing that indicates real military experience or combat capability." Elena's breathing remained steady and controlled, her heart rate unchanged despite the escalating aggression surrounding her position. Years of specialized training had taught her to maintain physiological calm under extreme pressure, a skill that allowed for clear thinking and precise action when violence became inevitable. Rodriguez stepped closer, emboldened by what he perceived as Elena's weakness. "Here's what's really going to happen," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone delivering an ultimatum. "You're going to apologize for disrespecting military personnel with superior qualifications, and then you're going to demonstrate proper courtesy and acknowledgement of rank." The overhead lighting cast everything in stark detail, eliminating shadows and creating an environment where every gesture and expression was clearly visible. Elena stood behind the serving counter like the calm center of a storm, her demeanor suggesting depths of capability that the recruits had never encountered in their limited military experience. Private Collins moved to support the group's intimidation campaign, his positioning intended to demonstrate their complete control over the situation. "We're not unreasonable people," he said with false sincerity. "All we're asking for is basic respect and proper military protocol. Simple acknowledgement of your place in the hierarchy." Elena's peripheral vision tracked each recruit's exact position, while her conscious mind continued the countdown that had begun with her warning. 10 seconds remaining. The tactical assessment that had been running continuously in the background of her consciousness shifted into active engagement mode, calculating optimal response sequences for the confrontation that was now inevitable. Kowalski felt compelled to contribute to the group's demonstration of dominance, stepping closer to Elena's position. "Maybe 15 seconds is how long it takes for reality to sink in," he suggested to his companions. "How long it takes to understand that military service requires more than just wearing the uniform." The mess hall's institutional environment seemed to amplify every sound and gesture, creating an atmosphere where the approaching climax felt both inevitable and charged with potential energy. The empty tables and chairs bore witness to the confrontation like silent observers in an arena. Torres increased the pressure of his grip on Elena's ribbon rack, his action representing a clear escalation toward physical assault. Maybe we should examine these decorations more closely, he announced, beginning to tug at the fabric. See what kind of fake credentials she's been hiding behind all this time. Elena's voice cut through the tension again, her tone carrying the same quiet authority, but with an added edge that made the air itself seem sharper. 5 seconds, gentlemen. The warning was delivered with such calm certainty that even Brennan felt a momentary flicker of uncertainty about the wisdom of their course of action. Rodriguez tried to reassert the group's momentum, sensing that their carefully constructed intimidation scenario was approaching some kind of critical juncture. 5 seconds for what exactly? He challenged, though something in Elena's tone had introduced an element of doubt into his confidence. The institutional clock on the far wall marked time with mechanical precision, each tick seeming to count down towards something the recruits couldn't identify, but increasingly sensed approaching. The mundane environment had become charged with an energy that none of them fully understood. Collins stepped forward, his eagerness to maintain group cohesion overriding his growing sense of unease. "She's bluffing," he announced to his companions. "Just desperate posturing from someone who finally realizes she's been cornered by real military personnel. Keep the pressure on." Elena's posture underwent another subtle shift, her weight distribution changing in ways that would have triggered immediate alarm in anyone with combat training. The recruits noticed nothing, too focused on their perceived dominance to recognize the physical indicators of someone transitioning from defensive awareness to offensive capability. Private Kowalski moved closer, emboldened by Collins's encouragement and eager to demonstrate his commitment to the group's intimidation campaign. "Time's up," he announced with forced bravado. "Now let's see what happens when reality meets fantasy in military service." The countdown reached 0 in Elena's mind, and something fundamental shifted in the atmosphere of the mess hall. The recruits felt the change without understanding its source, their formation still intact, but their absolute confidence beginning to waver as they sensed they had crossed an invisible line. Torres maintained his grip on Elena's uniform ribbons, his fingers tugging at the fabric with increasing aggression. "Let's see what's really behind these fake decorations," he announced, pulling harder at the ribbon rack. "Probably just standard-issue participation awards for basic training completion and administrative duties." Elena's response came with lightning speed that defied human reaction time. Her left hand moved in a precise arc that intercepted Torres's wrist, her grip closing with the controlled pressure of someone trained to disable without permanent damage. The movement was so fluid and economical that the other recruits barely registered it as aggressive action. Torres's expression shifted from confident aggression to shocked confusion as he found his hand immobilized in Elena's grasp. The pressure she applied to specific nerve points sent shooting pain up his arm, while simultaneously rendering his fingers unable to maintain their grip on her uniform. "What the hell?" he began, but his protest was cut short by the realization that he couldn't move his captured hand. Brennan's confident posture faltered as he witnessed his companion's sudden helplessness. The dynamic he had carefully constructed around their group dominance was shifting in ways he couldn't understand or control. "Hey," he said, his voice lacking its previous authority. "Let him go right now. That's an order from superior military personnel." Elena's voice remained calm and controlled as she maintained her grip on Torres's wrist. "I advised against this course of action," she said, her tone carrying the patience of someone explaining obvious consequences to children. "Physical assault on military personnel carries serious consequences under the Uniform Code of Military Justice." Rodriguez stepped forward, trying to reassert the group's authority through proximity and aggression. "You're the one committing assault," he challenged, though something in Elena's demeanor was making him increasingly uncomfortable. "Release him immediately or face the consequences of attacking fellow service members." The mess hall's institutional lighting cast everything in stark relief, highlighting the sudden transformation in the confrontation's dynamic. Elena stood behind the serving counter with Torres's wrist controlled in her grip, Her posture relaxed despite maintaining physical dominance over someone significantly larger than herself. Collins moved to support his companions, but his approach lacked the swagger that had characterized his earlier behavior. The ease with which Elena had neutralized Torres's aggression suggested capabilities none of them had anticipated or prepared to encounter. "We're all military personnel here," he said, his voice carrying forced reasonableness. "Let's de-escalate this situation before it gets out of hand." Elena's peripheral vision tracked each recruit's position while her conscious mind assessed their revised threat level. The tactical situation had shifted dramatically with her demonstration of capability, though she recognized that the recruit's shock would quickly transform into more dangerous forms of aggression. Private Kowalski felt compelled to act, but found himself uncertain about the appropriate response. The woman they had been harassing for the past 30 minutes had suddenly revealed physical skills that exceeded anything in his limited military experience. "Maybe we should step back and reconsider," he suggested to his companions, though his words lacked conviction. Torres struggled against Elena's grip, his efforts becoming more desperate as he realized the futility of his attempts to break free. The pain radiating from his wrist was unlike anything he had experienced, precisely calibrated to disable without causing permanent injury. "She's trained," he gasped to his companions. "Really trained." Brennan's mind raced as he tried to process the implications of what he was witnessing. The submissive kitchen worker they had been tormenting had transformed into someone capable of neutralizing trained military personnel with apparent ease. His football experience had taught him to recognize superior opponents, and every instinct was now screaming warnings he couldn't ignore. Elena maintained her grip on Torres's wrist while addressing the group with the same quiet authority. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying years of command experience, "you have made several serious errors in judgment this evening. I strongly recommend immediate withdrawal and reconsideration of your behavior." Rodriguez's bravado crumbled as he witnessed Elena's controlled demonstration of superior capability. The woman they had dismissed as weak and untrained was clearly operating at levels far beyond their comprehension. His neighborhood experience had taught him to recognize when confrontation had moved beyond his ability to control or predict. The overhead speakers remained silent, providing no distraction from the tension that now dominated the mess hall. The institutional environment seemed to amplify Elena's controlled authority and the recruits' growing realization that their carefully planned intimidation campaign had encountered something far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. Collins stepped backward, his movement unconscious but clearly defensive. The ribbons on Elena's uniform suddenly seemed less like participation awards and more like indicators of experience and capability that extended far beyond basic military service. "Maybe we misunderstood the situation," he said quietly. Elena released Torres's wrist with the same controlled precision she had used to capture it, the movement so fluid that he stumbled backward several steps before regaining his balance. His hand shook as circulation returned, the targeted nerve pressure having demonstrated capabilities that exceeded anything in his military training experience. The recruit's formation had unconsciously shifted from aggressive encirclement to defensive positioning, their bodies instinctively creating distance from someone who had just revealed skills that challenged everything they believed about their own military superiority. The dynamic of the confrontation had fundamentally changed in ways none of them could have anticipated. Brennan struggled to reassert leadership over a situation that had spiraled beyond his comprehension. "Look," he said, his voice lacking its previous authority, "maybe we all got a little carried away here. Military personnel should be able to work out their differences without escalating to physical confrontation." His words carried the hollow ring of someone desperately trying to salvage dignity from obvious defeat. Elena stepped out from behind the serving counter for the first time since the confrontation began, her movement controlled and purposeful. The recruits unconsciously retreated further, their bodies responding to threat indicators their conscious minds couldn't fully process. The kitchen worker they had been harassing had been replaced by someone whose every gesture suggested lethal capability. Rodriguez felt his street-smart instincts screaming warnings that overrode his military bravado. The woman standing before them moved with the fluid grace of someone who had turned violence into an art form, her casual confidence more intimidating than any aggressive posturing. "We should probably get going," he said to his companions, his voice carefully neutral. Torres cradled his wrist against his chest, the targeted nerve manipulation having left him with a vivid understanding of how easily Elena could have caused permanent damage. She knew exactly what she was doing, he whispered to Collins. That wasn't luck or desperation. That was professional training. Elena's voice carried across the mess hall with quiet authority that seemed to fill the institutional space. "For the record," she said, her tone remaining calm despite the obvious threat represented by 5 larger opponents. "I am Commander Elena Vasquez, Naval Special Warfare Command. My current assignment is classified administrative support, which required maintaining operational security until this moment." The revelation hit the recruits like a physical blow, their faces registering shock as they processed the implications of what Elena had just revealed. The ribbons they had dismissed as participation awards suddenly took on entirely different meanings, representing service and achievements far beyond their comprehension. Private Kowalski's voice cracked slightly as he attempted to speak. "Commander?" he repeated, the ranks seeming impossible to reconcile with the woman they had been harassing. "But you were serving food, working in the kitchen like regular enlisted personnel." The confusion in his voice reflected his complete inability to process the reality of their situation. Elena's response carried the patience of someone explaining obvious facts to confused children. Operational assignments frequently require personnel to maintain cover identities, private. The effectiveness of intelligence gathering depends on remaining unnoticed and underestimated by potential security threats. Collins stepped backward, his movement creating additional distance from Elena, while his mind raced to understand the full scope of their error. Naval Special Warfare meant SEALs or similar elite units, personnel whose training and capabilities existed on levels he had never imagined. "We didn't know," he said weakly, the excuse sounding pathetic even to his own ears. Brennan felt his carefully constructed leadership persona crumbling as he realized the magnitude of their mistake. A Naval Special Warfare commander represented everything he had aspired to become in military service, achievements and qualifications that dwarfed his own limited experience. The woman he had been trying to intimidate possessed the kind of background that made his football accomplishments seem like children's games. Elena continued her explanation with the same controlled authority. "Your behavior this evening constitutes harassment of superior officers, physical assault on military personnel, and violation of numerous regulations regarding conduct and military courtesy. These are serious offenses under the Uniform Code of Military Justice." Rodriguez's neighborhood instincts had taught him to recognize when confrontation had moved far beyond his ability to control, and every survival mechanism was now screaming at him to retreat immediately. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying genuine respect for the first time, "we apologize for any misunderstanding. We should probably return to our quarters now." Torres looked down at his still-aching wrist, the precise application of pressure serving as a vivid reminder of how easily Elena could have escalated their confrontation to far more serious levels. The restraint she had shown in neutralizing his aggression without causing permanent damage spoke to training and discipline that exceeded anything in his experience. The mess hall's institutional lighting seemed harsher now, casting Elena's composed figure in sharp relief against the backdrop of 5 recruits who had suddenly realized they were completely outmatched by someone they had grossly underestimated. The empty tables and chairs bore witness to their humiliation like silent observers in an arena where the outcome had been determined by superior skill and training. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the corridor beyond the mess hall, their measured cadence suggesting military personnel returning from evening duties. Elena's hearing, trained through years of specialized operations, identified at least 3 individuals moving in their direction with a purposeful gait of senior personnel. Master Chief Petty Officer Sarah Chun appeared in the doorway, her presence immediately commanding attention from everyone in the mess hall. Behind her followed Lieutenant Commander James Morrison and Senior Chief David Park, their expressions shifting from routine evening inspection to sharp focus as they assessed the tense situation before them. "Commander Vasquez," Master Chief Chin said, her voice carrying the respect and recognition of someone who understood exactly who Elena was and what her presence meant. "I trust everything is proceeding according to your operational requirements." The formal address made the recruits' faces drain of color as they realized the full scope of their catastrophic error. Elena maintained her composed posture while addressing the senior personnel who had just arrived. "Master Chief, the operational security exercise has concluded ahead of schedule. These personnel provided valuable insight into potential vulnerabilities in administrative cover assignments." Her words carried the clinical precision of someone delivering a mission briefing. Lieutenant Commander Morrison's gaze swept across the 5 recruits, his expression hardening as he recognized the signs of a confrontation that had escalated beyond acceptable bounds. His 23 years of service had taught him to read situations quickly, and everything about the recruits' positioning and demeanor suggested they had been engaging in behavior that violated multiple military regulations. Brennan felt his knees beginning to weaken as the implications of Elena's words sank into his consciousness. Operational security exercise meant their harassment had been witnessed and evaluated by someone whose authority extended far beyond anything he had encountered in his limited military experience. "We were just," he began, but his voice failed him as he struggled to find words that could explain their behavior. Senior Chief Park stepped forward, his bearing radiating the kind of authority that came from decades of military service and specialized training. "Recruits," he said, his voice carrying unmistakable command presence, "position yourselves at attention for formal address by superior officers." The order was delivered with such authority that all 5 young men snapped to military bearing despite their shock and confusion. Elena addressed the senior personnel with the casual confidence of someone reporting routine operational details. The subjects demonstrated classic patterns of harassment targeting perceived weakness, escalating from verbal intimidation to physical assault when they believe themselves unobserved by authority figures. Their behavior provides excellent training material for future security awareness briefings. Master Chief Chin's expression remained professionally neutral, but her eyes held the cold calculation of someone who had dealt with similar situations throughout her career. "Commander," she said, "do you require any additional documentation of this incident for your operational report?" Her question carried implications that made the recruits realize their behavior had been observed and recorded by personnel whose authority could destroy their military careers. Torres stared at Elena with the dawning realization that everything about their confrontation had been orchestrated from the beginning. The woman they had cornered and harassed possessed not only superior physical capabilities, but had been conducting some kind of official evaluation of their behavior and judgment. The ribbon rack he had grabbed represented achievements that dwarfed anything he could hope to accomplish. Lieutenant Commander Morrison moved closer to the recruits, his presence alone enough to make them maintain rigid attention despite their obvious distress. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying the weight of formal military authority, "you have just concluded an unscheduled practical examination in military conduct, operational security awareness, and respect for chain of command. Your performance will be thoroughly reviewed." Rodriguez felt his street-smart survival instincts screaming that their situation had moved far beyond anything he could control or manipulate. The woman they had been tormenting represented levels of military authority and capability that existed in realms he had never imagined, and their behavior had been witnessed by senior personnel whose recommendation could end their careers before they properly began. Elena continued her briefing with the same controlled professionalism. The subject displayed consistent patterns of assumption-based targeting, dismissing visual indicators of rank and experience in favor of superficial assessments. Their escalation to physical contact occurred within predicted timeframes and followed established behavioral models for harassment scenarios. Senior Chief Park's gaze moved from recruit to recruit, each young man feeling the weight of evaluation from someone whose experience and authority represented everything they hoped to achieve in military service. The irony of their situation was becoming clear. They had attempted to assert dominance over someone whose actual qualifications and achievements exceeded their combined potential. Collins struggled to maintain military bearing while processing the devastating realization that their harassment campaign had been nothing more than a training exercise observed by senior personnel. Every insulting comment, every aggressive gesture, every moment of assumed superiority had been witnessed and evaluated by people whose opinion could determine their future in military service. Master Chief Chun stepped forward, her bearing radiating the confidence that came from decades of successful military operations. Commander Vasquez's operational assessment will be forwarded through appropriate channels, she announced. All personnel involved in this evening's exercise should expect formal review of their conduct and judgment under military regulations. Elena reached into her uniform pocket and withdrew a small recording device, its presence serving as final confirmation that every moment of their harassment had been documented for official review. The operational parameters required comprehensive data collection on harassment patterns and escalation behaviors, she explained to the senior personnel, her tone carrying the clinical precision of someone concluding a successful mission. The 5 recruits stood at rigid attention, their faces reflecting the devastating realization that their entire military futures hung in the balance based on behavior they had believed was private and consequence-free. Every insulting comment, every aggressive gesture, every moment of assumed dominance had been captured and would be reviewed by personnel whose recommendations could end their careers. Master Chief Chun accepted the recording device with the practiced efficiency of someone who had handled similar situations throughout her career. This documentation will be invaluable for future training scenarios, she said, her words carrying implications that made the recruits understand their humiliation would serve as educational material for other military personnel. Lieutenant Commander Morrison addressed the recruits with the formal authority of someone delivering career-defining judgments. Your performance this evening demonstrates fundamental failures in military bearing, operational awareness, and respect for chain of command. These deficiencies will require immediate remedial action and extended evaluation of your suitability for continued service. Elena began gathering her personal effects from the serving area, her movements casual despite the profound impact her revelation had created. The operational cover assignment had served its purpose, providing valuable intelligence on security vulnerabilities and personnel behavior patterns that would improve future training protocols. Brennan struggled to find words that could somehow mitigate the catastrophic consequences of their behavior. "Ma'am," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "we sincerely apologize for our conduct. We had no understanding of your actual rank or qualifications." The apology sounded hollow even to his own ears, a desperate attempt to salvage something from complete professional destruction. Senior Chief Park's expression remained professionally neutral as he observed the recruit's obvious distress. Ignorance of superior officer identity does not constitute justification for harassment, intimidation, or physical assault, he stated. Military regulations regarding conduct apply regardless of perceived rank or assignment status. Elena addressed the recruits directly for the final time, her voice carrying the authority of someone whose words would be remembered and repeated throughout their remaining military careers. "Gentlemen," she said, "your behavior this evening has provided excellent insight into the importance of operational security and the dangers of assumption-based threat assessment." Torres looked down at his still-aching wrist, the precise nerve manipulation serving as a permanent reminder of how completely they had underestimated someone whose training and capabilities existed on levels they could never comprehend. The restraint Elena had shown in neutralizing his aggression spoke to professional discipline that exceeded anything in his limited experience. Master Chief Chun began escorting the senior personnel toward the exit, their departure signaling the conclusion of what had been disguised as routine evening inspection. "Commander Vasquez," she said, "your operational assessment will be processed through appropriate command channels with recommendations for enhanced security awareness training." Rodriguez felt the weight of complete professional humiliation settling over him as he realized that their harassment campaign will become legendary within military training circles. Every future class of recruits would learn about their catastrophic failure of judgment as an example of what happened when assumption replaced awareness. Elena paused at the mess hall entrance, turning back to address the 5 recruits who remained at rigid attention. "Your military careers will continue," she said, her tone carrying both authority and unexpected mercy. "This experience should serve as permanent education in the importance of respect, professionalism, and accurate threat assessment." Collins struggled to maintain composure while processing the profound transformation that had occurred in less than 30 minutes. The woman they had cornered and harassed possessed qualifications and achievements that represented everything he hoped to accomplish in military service, making their behavior seem not just inappropriate, but tragically foolish. The institutional lighting of the mess hall cast long shadows as Elena departed with the senior personnel, leaving the 5 recruits alone with the devastating knowledge of their complete misjudgment. The empty tables and chairs bore witness to their humiliation like silent observers who had watched assumption clash with reality. Private Kowalski finally broke the silence that had settled over the mess hall after Elena's departure. "We just harassed a Navy SEAL commander," he said, his voice carrying the stunned disbelief of someone still processing an impossible reality. 30 seconds, she said. She could have ended all of us in 30 seconds. If this story moved you, drop a comment about your favorite moment, or share if you've witnessed similar courage and hidden strength in real life. Sometimes the people who seem quietly unassuming possess the most extraordinary capabilities. The mess hall returned to its institutional quiet, but the 5 recruits would carry the memory of their encounter with Commander Elena Vasquez for the remainder of their military careers, a permanent reminder that respect must be earned through demonstrated competence rather than assumed through superficial judgment.